I'm watching that last $1 million I have, hurtling towards zero month after month. And I got to a place where I had to borrow money from my wife to pay my taxes.
Mike Brown is worth $13 million, but to him, that number might as well be zero, and not in the existential way you might think. Mike spent years chasing wealth, reinvesting every dollar, aiming for a $100 million empire. But he didn't get there. Instead, he ran out of money.
I began losing $100,000 a month, and it didn't stop. There was days I didn't even want to get out of bed because I was so humiliated and so completely broken, and I didn't even want to face the day.
That experience didn't just change his bank account, it changed his entire philosophy on money, success, and even happiness.
If you can't be rich now, you'll never be rich because wealth is a state of being.
Mike's story is intense, it's exciting, and thanks to his mistakes, it's very valuable for us. We're going to hear exactly what he did to end up rich broke, how he clawed his way out of that, and how he's built a safer, smarter fortune that keeps him out of danger for good this time. I'm Harry Morton, and this is Moneywise, a podcast, by the way, that's made specifically with the Hampton community in mind. Hampton is a private group for high net worth founders built to connect people who are dealing with the same unique challenges we face as entrepreneurs. And it's also a really great place to get the exact advice you need to avoid situations like the one that Mike got himself into. So if you're a founder doing at least 3 million ARR, go and check it out at joinhampton.com. This is usually the part where we explain the guest's net worth, and we're still going to, but keep in mind he doesn't assign too much value to it.
It's about 13 million, kind of all in. So I'm nearly back to where I was, but it certainly looks a lot different than it did.
And what percentage of that is liquid?
We're shoring it up and growing it. Growing the liquidity piece as fast as we can. So I am still in rebalance mode. My target is to be 70% liquid within the next few years and continue growing it from there. I mean, but a lot of our net worth still is tied up in her business and my business and stuff like that. So we're on the train, and like I said, every time more money comes in, it's just pushed into liquidity and rebalancing.
As you can tell, today, how his wealth is structured is far more important than the big number itself. Later on, we'll deep dive into that and hear the financial rules he lives by to ensure that number is having maximum impact on his life instead of just sounding impressive. But first, the story of how he discovered those rules, the hard way. And the great irony of Mike's story is that it all started because he decided he never wanted to experience money problems.
Growing up, I watched my parents fight every single night, and they only fought about one thing: money. My dad worked very hard, but there was 5 kids in the family, and money was very tight. And so, he was trying to put food on the table. And I remember in middle school, we drove a 1985 Pontiac Bonneville. It was brown. There was thumbtacks in the ceiling to keep the headliner up. And I made my dad drop me off 2 blocks from school because I didn't want any of my rich friends to see this super embarrassing car. And I couldn't understand, my 13-year-old brain couldn't understand for the life of me why my dad would drive such a crappy car. But now, look, now I understand the sacrifice he was making. My dad loves cars, but he put feeding his family ahead of his own needs, and I really appreciate that sacrifice now, but certainly didn't at the time.
When did you first become aware that money mattered, do you think?
I was acutely aware at that time in my life, and there was such a contrast from growing up in such a wealthy town, and I knew that money was tight. My parents always sacrificed. They made sure that their kids always came first, and we never went without. But watching my parents fight about money, I had an acute understanding that we were not the same as some of the other families, and so that really became, I made a vow at that time that I'm going to work. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to make so much money that I never have to fight with my spouse about money. And that really became the core driver. Like I said, I'm going to have so much money, I'll never have to worry about money again. That was the core driver until it became a limitation.
What do you think your original vision of making it was back then?
When I was young, I knew 2 things. I knew I wanted to be in the Navy, and I knew that I eventually wanted to be an entrepreneur. So my original dream was to be the CEO of a publicly traded company. I wanted to start a company that would eventually go public. That dream evolved over time as I saw and actually knew people that took companies public, and I realized that was not going to be my path. But for me, that was the pinnacle of success. I read Atlas Shrugged when I was 16 years old, and that really inspired me. I knew that I wanted to have financial independence, and I thought that taking a company public was the way to do that.
Mike's a guy who follows through, and given his story, maybe a bit too much. You'll see. He did achieve his Navy ambitions, and it was after that his financial dream really began.
Got out of the Navy in 2011, and I went to work for my mentor and his business partner, who happened to be my uncle. So I had a family connection now to this firm. And I got out and I worked for them for 2 years, and then decided to go out on my own. And I had some savings. I started my company with my business partner. We flew jets in the Navy together. We figured that if we were good at flying combat missions, we'd probably be good at running a company. And we started in 2013, and before I made a single penny, I got down to $2,000 on my checking account. And then a life-changing deal came across our desk, and we actually made $1 million on our first oil and gas deal.
And was that like, were you able to make that liquid fairly quickly, or was this just kind of like, great, big deal, and it's like all in the fun? Like, when did you start to like personally see the benefits of all this stuff?
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like I realize that it may sound insensitive and out of touch to say $1 million is not a lot of money, but the reality is, that money hit our bank account after taxes. I put a down payment on a house, we reinvested in the business, and all of a sudden it was gone. And so that was kind of my first inclination of like, wow, this, I always thought making $1 million was going to be the dream, and that was going to mean I had arrived. And very quickly, I realized that was not enough.
But I can still imagine that that's a big feeling, right? So you come out of the Navy, your first deal, it's a huge deal. Like, what did it feel like to land that money, like to put the down payment on the house, to do those things? What was that kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the stark contrast of, staring at the ceiling, looking at the $2,000 left in my checking account, wondering like, am I going to have to go get a job? Like, is this thing really going to work? To go from that to $1 million in liquidity almost immediately. I mean, it was one of the greatest feelings of my life, certainly. I mean, I remember that day when the wire hit our account, and it really did feel like, okay, like this is going to work, and we've made it, and it's kind of off to the races from that point. So, I don't want to underscore or understate how important that moment was, but I think the fleeting nature is really the part that got me. It was the space after that.
When did you sort of stop and realize, hey, I'm wealthy?
Yeah, it's a great question because, we were going all in, backs against the wall, like betting on ourselves, and we always say we want to buy call options on ourselves. So even from the first time we started making money, we were immediately redeploying that capital into deal after deal after deal. And there was certainly a sense that this was a gold rush and that, we needed to capitalize at that time. So even though we were making a lot of money, we were always redeploying it and just continuing to acquire properties and grow the portfolio. So even from the beginning, I was never liquid. I was always, the minute money would hit our account, we would buy another deal and it would be gone, and got really used to living in this rob Peter to pay Paul, always stretched to the limit, always waiting for the next wire to come through so we could pay vendors and move on to the next deal. And in the Navy, we have a saying, which is the normalization of deviance, meaning, we're living far outside the standard deviation of what is normal. We're moving millions of dollars around, and yet we're never taking any for ourselves. We're constantly redeploying, and I really normalized that feeling.
What do you think drove that incessant need to keep going? Because presumably you could have just cashed out at some point and gone, do you know what, 20 million, that's enough. I can live a really good life on 20 million and not have arguments with my spouse about it maybe. How did you, what was that internal fire, do you think?
Number one, I think it was the excitement and euphoria of the gold rush. I mean, we knew that we had caught lightning in a bottle and that this was an incredible time. And, we couldn't buy properties fast enough because the prices just kept rising. I mean, to give kind of context, we price deals in dollars per acre. When we started in 2013, we were buying deals at $3,000 an acre. Those same deals in 2016 were at $15,000 an acre. So, I mean, the prices were just rising so rapidly that, like I said, we couldn't buy deals fast enough. So there was definitely a sense that we needed to get ours, we needed to get it fast, and we knew that party wouldn't last forever. So I think those external factors were certainly driving it. But also, I was doing what I thought rich people did. Like I saw, people wheeling and dealing. And so, I didn't have a playbook of like, hey, I need to be peeling off a reserve to create that safety layer and protect my family. I was just going all in. And the other piece of that is like, I thought I needed $100 million to be wealthy. So even as I started crossing, that 10, and we made about $20 million in 5 years, I thought that wasn't enough. Like I really had my sights set on this $100 million mark, which is completely arbitrary, but that's kind of what we're told in society. I mean, I've talked to thousands of entrepreneurs at this point, and that seems to be a number that sticks out in a lot of people's mind. And so,
why?
Again, it's a great question, but I certainly knew $1 million was not enough after my first experience, and there was no real playbook for me that said, hey, you need to create this safety net. And I had normalized the stress of just always going all in and always redeploying. And so, I think it's common knowledge. Like when you have a startup, you burn the boats, you're wearing all the hats, you're all in. But then at some point, you need to transition your skill set to be a scale-up CEO where you're hiring a team and you're creating a vision and all of that. Well, the same thing is true for wealth creation, right? We start as an accumulator of wealth. We're going all in and betting on ourselves. But at some point, we need to transition to being a defender of wealth. And I did not have that knowledge, or it really never even occurred to me to create safety. I was just going as fast as I could.
What was your life like spending-wise around this period of time?
Look, we were taking money out of the company and spending it, and the other thing is we were in this gold rush, and so it became abundantly clear that hard work was not the answer. It was creating leverage. It was investing in good deals, and so I never really had this typical entrepreneur experience of like hustle and grind and put your nose down and then wake up one day and sell your company. Like we started making money early on, and we did a great job of using that money to create experiences. So going on amazing vacations. A great story. We sponsored a friend's race car in the Rolex Daytona 24 and ended up winning the race. And so I got to be in the pits. Like we created all of these really cool experiences along the way. So I did realize that, yes, I am wealthy and I can use that money to make magic happen. And that was a really cool thing that we did. But the reality is, like, I could have been financially free at 36 years old if I had the discipline or the knowledge to create that freedom for myself. But instead, I was just turning it over and going all in. Yeah.
So then that leads on to, at the peak of your net worth, how much was actually, when I say the word peak, that, alludes to something that's coming here, but tell me, like, at that peak, like, how much was liquid? Like, what was your liquid net worth at that point?
Well, liquid net worth and net worth are very different. And so,
let's say liquid-ish.
Yeah, liquid-ish. I mean, never more than $1 million, and that was only fleeting, right? Because again, we were always turning it over into new investments. I mean, I started becoming an angel investor in 2014. I was deploying capital into every deal that came across my desk. I mean, I invested in hospitality projects, automotive restoration business, crypto. I was trading commodity futures. So, we would have $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, sitting around kind of waiting to deploy. But there was never a sense of, I need to keep this liquid. I mean, I thought, that deploying into high risk, high reward deals was the way to make money. And so that's what we always did. So, I never had a tremendous amount of liquidity because I didn't know to. But the peak of my total net worth was, somewhere between $15 and $20 million. But it was all, deployed into real estate and oil and gas and venture capital and all these other kinds of deals.
Got it. Yeah. And what year was this, by the way, for context?
This would have been, kind of 2016 to 2019. So we ended up realizing that this crazy boom was getting long in the tooth, and there started to become more downside than upside. And so we started having the conversation about cashing out from our oil and gas properties. And we did that in 2019. So, a lot of times when someone has an exit, that's their only financial windfall. Well, the reality was we would build packages and sell them off to private equity firms along the way. But 2019 was our biggest. And then, consummate with that sale, we decided to shut down that company, no longer be active in the oil and gas space, and kind of go our separate ways.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, and so, all this sort of 15 to 20 million was tied up in all of the things it was tied up in. What was the cash flow then? Because we're going to talk about cash flow. So what was it at that point when you were just aggressively putting stuff to work?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority was still tied up in oil and gas at that point, but the cash flow of our oil and gas properties was anywhere between, 200 to 300,000 a month, and half of that was mine. So I was making 100 to 150K passively at that point. And look, I don't have any regrets in life, but I could have sailed off into the sunset and just kept those assets, but instead we decided to sell those. We got an amazing multiple. And then again started to redeploy that capital immediately.
Yeah, cool. Was your lifestyle inflated based on that net worth, by the way, or were you running pretty lean at this point in your life?
No, I mean, we were spending anywhere from 30 to 50K a month. And I think there's diminishing returns. Like I was spending pretty indiscriminately, and again, having talked to hundreds of entrepreneurs at this point, it does seem that most spending kind of caps out somewhere between 30 and 50, unless you start doing things like collecting stuff. So collecting houses, collecting wine, collecting art, that's the only way to really start inflating it way beyond that. So I was in a place where I could spend money without really thinking about it, but I would say I never got into this crazy excess of money where it really dramatically rises from there.
Yeah, so you're not one of those guys that would be flying coach, billionaires still flying coach. You enjoyed the money. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, success looked like buying supercars. So, after we made that first million, I went out and bought a brand new Audi S7 and then bought an R8 and have had supercars in my life ever since then. Growing up, I had a Lamborghini Countach poster on my wall, and that meant arriving. And so supercars were a huge part of my life. So I always had a cool car in the garage. I would definitely not put myself on the frugal end of the spectrum. We definitely knew how to have a good time and enjoy money.
At this point, Mike was living a life where if you'd warned him that money problems were on the horizon, he probably would have just laughed it off. Liquid assets can be incredibly valuable, especially for leverage, which Mike will explain later, but they can also create a dangerous false sense of security. Because at the end of the day, real financial security is about having the flexibility to handle whatever life throws at you, expected or not, without worrying about how you're going to pay your bills. Mike was about to learn the hard way that chasing more for his future had left him powerless in the moment.
We had that final sale in 2019, and I exited my company and I exited a marriage at the same time. So when it comes to wealth preservation, divorce, 0 out of 10 recommend. So immediately overnight, my net worth was halved. And because I had so many illiquid assets, most of my cash went to paying off the divorce. So immediately, not only was my net worth halved, but almost everything was tied up again in illiquid and semi-liquid assets.
What was your portfolio breakdown there? I guess pre and post divorce?
When we sold our company, we invested in some commercial real estate properties, still had some legacy oil and gas assets. And I was left, in 2020 with about $1 million in cash, and then everything else tied up in these illiquid assets. So I had a $2.5 million venture portfolio, a couple $1 million in oil and gas assets, and then another couple million in real estate.
What was the exact moment you realized your net worth didn't matter?
So it became abundantly clear that after I sold my cash flowing assets, that I somehow needed to replace that cash flow, because I had still been deploying my capital like it was never ending, and I was investing in these illiquid assets. And I built this dream home and realized I needed to replace that cash flow.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you, Mike. The home that you're sitting in right now was built pre-divorce, pre-bubble bursting.
So I got divorced in 2019. I met my the love of my life, who would become my wife now. Shortly thereafter, and we started building this home in May of 2020. So it was about a year and a half after I got divorced.
Cool. So it didn't totally cripple you, this event. Like so you're smiling. So you fill in the blanks for me here. I'm just trying to imagine so you went from like everything we invest in turns to gold. We can't get anything wrong. We're just going to reinvest. Things start to look a bit dicey. You separate from your partner at the time. A bunch of your net worth goes out the door overnight.
Yep.
Like, where are you at at that point in time?
So now I realize I need to replace my cash flow. And my dear friend Walker Dybel wrote a book called Buy Then Build. I got really excited about acquisition entrepreneurship, and I figured that the best way to replace that cash flow would be to acquire a company. And I broke all of the rules that Walker recommends, and I went out and I bought a distressed e-commerce company. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, and I figured I could just clean up the balance sheet, eliminate the debt, and I would be cash flowing overnight. And it was an utter disaster. So shortly after we closed, everything, the acquisition channel, the only acquisition channel that the e-commerce company had was Facebook. Apple pushed the iOS 14 update. Facebook ads got crippled. So overnight went from getting a 4-to-1 return on ad spend to a 1-to-1, and no longer being able to acquire customers profitably. And so shortly after I closed, I began losing $100,000 a month, and it didn't stop. It just got worse from there. And so now I'm watching that last $1 million I have, hurtling towards zero month after month. And I got to a place where I had to borrow money from my wife to pay my taxes.
Wow. How did that feel?
I mean, it was utterly embarrassing. I mean, I'm incredibly lucky. I married a fellow entrepreneur who had built her own multi-7-figure digital marketing agency. So, having that access to have someone, kind of bail me out was both lucky, but also, humiliating, right? Like I was this, investor, everything, Midas touch guy, everything turns to gold. And all of a sudden I've got to humble myself. And by the way, that still didn't get me out of the situation. I'm still losing $100,000 a month in this company, staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night. I mean, there was days I didn't even want to get out of bed because I was so humiliated and so completely broken. And I didn't even want to face the day.
Did you take on debt to buy the e-com business, or did you just buy it cash with the money that you had on, left over?
The purchase price was, I think, $2.3 million. I put in $500,000 myself. I had about $800,000 in debt via an SBA loan, and then I raised the balance from some of my closest friends. So that was the thing that really drove me. Like I knew shortly after I closed and it turned disastrous that this was a losing bet, right? I've always considered myself more of an investor than an entrepreneur. And the difference is entrepreneurs burn the boats, they go all in, and as an investor, I only need to make 6 out of 10 deals work. I only need to win more often than I lose. So, I knew enough at that point in my investing career to cut the losers, but now I had raised money from some of my best friends. And so I'm willing to lose my own money, but I was not willing to lose their money. So I stayed in this business a year longer than it made sense because I wanted to save face with my friends, and I was unwilling to lose their money.
Yeah, that must have been incredibly hard. And at this point, you're rich but broke, right? To be blunt and like kind of mean about it, but like that's kind of where you were at. Like, what was that like?
No, I mean, I'm still a multimillionaire on paper, but I couldn't access any of my capital. And you can't borrow against your venture capital startup portfolio to pay the bills. And
Sure.
and so, that was when I really did have this wake up call. What does it all mean? And realize that net worth doesn't matter at all. And that without liquidity, I really was a broke millionaire. And I've since found out that like so many entrepreneurs live in that status quo. I mean, there are so many people that have a multi-million-dollar net worth, but don't have any access to capital.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting, and not what you assume from the outside. Did your like we talked about your lifestyle and what that looked like? Did your spending habits change? Like what was your day-to-day like at that period?
Yeah, not really. And, still kind of, and again, I was super lucky that my wife had this incredible business. So
yep.
She was able to prop up our spending and relied on her for the day to day. So we didn't have to cut our lifestyle. We didn't have to sell our house cool. or anything like that.
And what did that feel like too? Because you mentioned at the top, like your parents fought about money growing up. And here you are as a highly successful entrepreneur many years later, being floated by your girlfriend at the time, now wife. Is that right? Like how did that go? Like what was that? Was there any tension around that? It sounds like she's pretty badass and doing her own thing. So like, just tell me about that experience, and that dynamic.
Yeah. And, at the time that we got together, like I brought assets and she brought cash flow. We immediately kind of blended finances, and we did have conversations about what that looked like. We certainly also didn't expect my net worth to drop so dramatically in that period of time. But look, yeah, my wife is a legend. She is a badass CEO, and for me, yes, it was humbling, but I don't subscribe to traditional gender roles. There was no like humiliation as a man for having my wife pay for things. This is a partnership, right? And the reality is that it was incredible actually for me to rely on someone else for the first time in my life, because I think as high performers, we go through life and just put the team on our back. We're used to being responsible for everyone and being ultimately responsible to ourselves. And it was really one of the greatest gifts of my life to get to a place where I relied on someone else for the first time and was like, oh, wow, like you got me. Like I can be messy. I can make all these mistakes and you're going to hold down the fort and actually take care of me. So there was some real beauty in experiencing that lesson.
So let's talk about rebuilding with cash flow then. So you're kind of in this situation, the e-commerce business is tanked. What happened in the end, by the way? Did you just wind it up? Did you sell it? Did you ended up selling it for the remaining debt on the note. Cool. So, I lost about $1.8 million inside of 18 months. I sold it to a guy with kind of a celebrity brand that I thought was probably one of the only people on the planet that could turn it around, and gave my investors, a chance to make their money back on the backside. But I lost, all of my liquidity and capital that I had deployed into that company. And then kind of had to start completely over from a cash flow standpoint. Kind of the irony here is that all of a sudden, some of those illiquid investments did start paying out. And so, what I say often is like, I wish everyone a failure that brings you to your knees that doesn't make you start completely over. I was incredibly lucky that there was some assets that I could sell that were coming to maturity. And so I was able to start rebuilding and rebalancing very quickly. And, at that point, I've been angel investment free since 2019. And sounds like Alcoholics Anonymous or something.
Yeah, totally. And, now every dollar that comes in, I keep it liquid. And so, I'm only investing in liquid and cash flowing assets.
And by the way, there are a lot of different takes on angel investing and strategies. And a lot of what you do depends on your context, why you're getting into it, what you want out of it, what the rest of your portfolio looks like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to find the advice that aligns best with you, shameless plug here, the Hampton community is an amazing place to find it. You can talk to real people in your position that will share things privately they would never discuss publicly unless they come onto this podcast, I guess. So if you're a founder doing more than 3 million ARR, check it out at joinhampton.com. Anyway, let's get back to the show. In a few minutes, we're going to talk more about how his experience radically changed his view on wealth beyond just the numbers side and why he's grateful for the failure. But before that, let's get to a complete breakdown of his current portfolio strategy, sans angel investing. So what did your first cash flow play look like after the collapse?
Luckily, there were some oil and gas assets that didn't go along with the sale that we had that hadn't been drilled yet. Those started to come in. So we started to build a little bit of cash flow again from oil and gas. And then it was back to the drawing board. So I started building a coaching business. So, going from a place where I shouldn't have ever had to work again back to, now I'm back in the entrepreneurial grind, building that coaching business. And at this time, now I'm starting to do the forensic analysis and go, how did I get here? How can I rebuild? And what does that playbook look like? And started to educate myself on that cash flow piece. Something that came into my awareness that I had, if you'd have told me at 33 that fixed income should be a part of my portfolio, I would have laughed you out of the room. That's an asset for old people. But now realizing that hey, we only need one wealth creation tool. For most of us, that's going to be our primary business. And that our investments should actually serve to hedge risk in case something happens to that primary business. And so now when I think about investing, I'm thinking about engineering out risk rather than swinging for the fences. And building a fixed income portfolio, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to create that safety net for entrepreneurs. And so, now, as I make cash in my primary business, that's going into building a fixed income portfolio with treasuries and municipal bonds and similar type assets.
What is your cash flow now, on a monthly basis or annual, whatever kind of makes the most sense?
Yeah, so I'm still rebalancing from illiquid and semi-liquid assets into liquidity. So, my wife and I both make plenty of income from our primary business, which means that, we don't have to be as conservative from the fixed income approach. So we've got a small portfolio on the fixed income side, but really we're still stacking liquidity into, more traditional equities, index funds, things like that. I am currently, living off the cash flow from our primary businesses. I don't need to live off the cash flow from my passive income. But we've got 6 figures in income from oil and gas assets and things like that.
So what does that allocation look like right now? So you're saying you're putting that sort of liquid stuff into index funds and so on. What does that kind of how does that break out?
Yeah, I think it's different than it's different for everybody. And the way I think about investing now is, when do I need access to this capital? And the longer your time horizon is, the more risk you can take. And so, again, as we make income in our businesses, now we're just stacking everything into an equity portfolio. We're in a sell stuff mode. So, I had some rental properties. She actually had a house in Austin that was an Airbnb, and we're shedding all of that stuff and just building our liquidity. So, everything that I make now above what we spend is just going into an equity portfolio that looks very boring. I mean, ultimately, it's a basket of index funds that, anchored by the S&P, but with some foreign exposure and things like that. But it is the most traditional, boring portfolio that you can imagine.
How does that feel to you? Are you bored by that? Are you stoked by it, or you're oh man, why are we not rolling this over like we were back in the day?
Yeah, well, I love it, right? Because now that's what safety looks like to me. And, if I want to grow my wealth, if I want to grow my net worth, I'm doing that through increasing my income. I'm doing that through growing my business. Again, she's an incredible entrepreneur. Her business is growing incredibly fast. And so that's where the net worth side, the wealth creation side is. And for us, investments just mean safety. And, the irony is that in creating that safety through investments, now we're freed up to make big swings in our primary business because we have a safety net to fall back on.
So then what are your rules for your portfolio at this point?
Yeah, so I think of financial freedom as
3 steps, 3 levels. So the first level of financial freedom is 12 months of liquidity in a non-volatile asset that you can access within 24 hours. So for anybody listening to this, if you don't have 12 months of liquidity, do not pass go, do not invest in anything else. That's the first step. The second step is level 2 financial freedom is 5 to 7 years of spending, again, in a liquid asset. And now you can start thinking about maybe deploying into illiquid assets. But until you have a 5-year reserve of spending at your ideal level, because what I've learned is liquidity is optionality. The only way to get knocked out of the game of entrepreneurship is to run out of money. As you're building a business, creating endless optionality really should be the goal. Because if you have 5 years of your ideal spending in a liquid asset, now there's nothing that can knock you out of the game, right? Like you can weather all kinds of storms. And then ultimate financial freedom is level 3 financial freedom, where your portfolio provides enough cash flow for your desired spending level for the rest of your life without ever drawing down on the principal. And so, that for some people that could look like a portfolio of rental houses. For me, it looks like oil and gas assets that are starting to pay out. For other people, fixed income, in my opinion, is the most safe and easy way to build that financial freedom. And so, that's the playbook that I wish I had a decade ago. If you'd have given 33-year-old me that playbook, again, I could have been financially free at 36. Instead, I was swinging for the fences. So, I call that level 3 financial freedom escape velocity. And now, the way I look at things is, how can I pull that escape velocity timeline forward? Right? How can I think in terms of instead of in terms of dollars, in terms of time? So if I'm going to spend money on something, how far does that push out my financial freedom timeline?
How do you think about leveraging power at this point? Like, is that still less important to you than cash flow? Sounds like yes, but talk to me about kind of leverage and that side of things.
Leverage is an incredible tool for building wealth, and leverage comes in all kinds of forms, right? But if we're talking about debt as a leverage tool, right? Debt could be one of the greatest wealth enhancers, but it can also be the greatest destroyer of wealth, right? So I'm a lot more careful about leverage, but I think to go full myopic and just remove access to debt entirely, I think is kind of missing the point, right? It's just being a lot more intentional and a lot more wise. So, I still have a mortgage on my home. I have a mortgage on my vacation property. But I'm just using debt a lot more intentionally. Using debt to buy a failing company, probably not so good.
What does your personal monthly burn look like right now?
Yeah, so it's still in that 30 to 50K range, depending on what we've got going on. So
that's quite a range, though. So do you track that carefully, or are you kind of pretty loosey-goosey is probably not fair, but are you kind of relaxed about it, or do you incessantly track it?
So the way I think about things now is the Marie Kondo budget, which is, does this bring me joy? And getting really clear. So I always want to give people and myself permission to spend on the things that bring me joy. I have a tool that I created called the One-Page Wealth Snapshot. It's a net worth and cash flow calculator, and it also is a financial freedom calculator. I track monthly and then kind of do a quarterly review. And at the end of the last year, realized we were hitting kind of the upper range and going, hey, let's do a review and look at the things that bring me joy. And one of the things I looked at, my wife was like, hey, when was the last time you drove your Lamborghini? And I was like, man, I actually can't remember. So I went out in the garage and looked at the odometer. I put less than 1,000 miles on my car last year. I didn't spend any time at all enjoying my car, and I had an outsized portion of my net worth tied up in my car. Mm-hmm. So I just sold my Lamborghini. It felt incredibly freeing.
I thought you were going to say I'm signed up to all these meets this year as a result, but no, you just okay, I'm not going to keep doing it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was an important part of my life for many years. And again, to me that felt like arriving. Well, now when I get quiet with myself, a car doesn't represent that anymore. And so, I just sold that car. I'm paring down other stuff. We're selling a rental property, because all of these things is just does this actually bring me joy? Mm-hmm. And so we flipped our cash flow by about 12K after the end of the year, just realizing not so much from a need, but from a place of, am I being a good steward of my wealth? Are these things that I'm spending money on actually enriching my life? And if not, let's shed.
So now you're sitting there at this like super comfortable 13 million. You're living the same lifestyle you were before. You feel much safer. I'm assuming you're going to sleep better at night. Like all these things are like wonderful things. Take me back to the Mike who thought like 100 million was the goal. Like, how do you square that? Like, how do you feel about that right now? Are you still like, is that still the goal? Is that still where you're headed? Like, tell me about like your attitude to wealth for wealth's sake at this point.
The beautiful gift of this great reset, right, was realizing that money as an ends is actually completely worthless, right? Because money is just a battery. Money is just an amplifier, and if we're not using money in service of creating the life that we want to create, then money abhors a vacuum, and so just accumulating money for money's sake doesn't actually do anything for us. But what does do something for us is getting really clear on the life that we want to create. And so now I define wealth as freedom or sovereignty in 4 areas: freedom of health, freedom of relationships, freedom of time, and freedom of mind. And so I am using money as a battery to buy back freedom in all of those 4 areas. So that really is, the basis of my coaching programs, and what I teach is, let's get really clear on the life we want to live. And by the way, that looks different for everybody, right? But let's design a life that we never want to retire from, and then let's use money as a tool to pull that timeline forward. And when people go through this type of exercise, they realize that like most of the things that are going to make you happy are completely free. For me, that's riding mountain bikes with my son and going skiing with my kids on the weekend and creating unforgettable experiences with my friends. And so now that's how I prioritize. Time is the only non-renewable resource, right? So now time is the ultimate thing that I design my life around, and spending my time with the people that I love, doing the things that I love, is of utmost importance.
It really interests me though, like why we set these arbitrary goals in mind, because you're right. Like we've had Prof G, Scott Galloway on the podcast a bunch of episodes ago. And like I literally just heard him the other day talking about, these billionaires, just like another billion isn't going to make you any happier, boss, is the line he was saying, and it's obviously super easy for him to say. It's like, he's got like half a billion in his bank account or whatever. But you do wonder, like, are we going to be happier at 105 million versus like 72? Like, is that juice really worth the squeeze?
Yeah, I can unequivocally say that, yes, look, like the idea that money won't make you happy is only partially true, right? Like some money is much better. It's better to be rich than poor, right? Because money gives you optionality. Liquidity gives you optionality to solve problems, right? So if my family member is sick, like I know that I can take care of that no matter what. That does buy a level of safety that sets the stage for happiness.
100%.
But there's certainly diminishing returns, and it turns out that most things that actually make us happy don't require a lot of money. But those are actually the hard things. It's hard to take responsibility for your life and say, okay, what is it that I actually want to create, and draw boundaries around those things. And so we tell ourselves this lie that more money is the reason that we're doing the things that we're doing. And I hear people all the time say, "Oh, I'm doing it for my family." But if they stop and ask their family, "Hey, would $30 million more make you happy?" They say, "No, I want to spend time with my dad."
Yeah, I try not to tell myself that lie all the time, because I know for sure a lot of this is my drive. Like my wife would be, my wife is a magical person that would be super happy if we lived in like a 2-bedroom little house in the, like she'd be equally happy there as she would be in like whatever. So it's all me. it's really all me. But anyway, say all these things, but I'm speaking to you and I can see out the back of your window and you've got like this beautiful view behind you. You're in a pretty sweet location. Like that's awesome. Like there's no question that it enables some pretty rad stuff. So, yeah.
And look, building my dream house, was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And, by no means was this the best investment of my life from an ROI perspective. But How I try to frame investments now is return on happiness, and investing in building my dream home. It's become a gathering place we have monthly founder dinners. I host retreats here, and that has brought me a tremendous amount of joy. So, what I try to think about now is aligning our wealth with our values and creating that life that we actually want to create. And to me, this is the pinnacle of that.
Amen to all that. It's beautiful. Do you feel richer than before then?
Yeah, I'm wealthy beyond belief, right? All of this led me. I'm putting the finishing touches on my book that's going to come out next year. The title of the book is Be Rich Now, and the central thesis is the law of now, which is if you can't be rich now, you'll never be rich, because wealth is a state of being, right? And that really is how I feel, is that I can create true wealth in the present moment, because that's the only time we can actually experience wealth.
It's not a million miles away from it's a different angle on it, but it's similar to the way that at least I came away from reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week back in the day. It's just why are we working our asses off to have that payday when we're 65? Why don't we enjoy that right now? And I think what you're talking about is exactly that, and it's awesome. I totally subscribe to it.
Yeah, and look, the reality, the concept of retirement is that means you have to escape from a life. So why would I not build a life that I'd never need to escape from? I am leaping out of bed. I'm working harder than I've ever worked. I'm leaping out of bed to work because I've shifted from this place of wealth accumulation and external validation and all of the reasons many of us build a first company. Now I'm living a life of service. I'm living, I'm building something that's greater than myself. It's really not about me. It's about the people that I can help. It's about the clients that I can serve. It's about putting my message out there and helping people, wake up to what's really important in life. And when you've tied what you do for work to a mission like that, I would do this for free. And it just turns out money is a byproduct for creating value in the world. And so now I get to live in this place of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. And, that's something I'll never retire from. It may look different over the years, and I give myself full permission to pivot, but I'm all in on service at this point.
I started this episode by saying that Mike's story is incredibly ironic, and it is. He wanted to get wealthy so he could avoid fighting about money, particularly in marriage, and then he ended up nearly cashless and divorced. And there are two big lessons here based on that. One is the financial lesson of not equating net worth with financial security, and the other is that there are problems in life you just can't avoid by having more money. Mike was so focused on avoiding the marital struggles he saw growing up, he chased what felt like the obvious solution to him. Get rich and you won't have to fight about money. But the truth is, having capital won't make your marriage better. That's a different kind of work. Money can be valuable in a partnership, but it is not what holds it together. You are. I'll spare you the further rant from me on that, and we can instead go back to Mike with some straightforward takeaways about how to actually be rich in life and not just on paper.
First and foremost is getting really clear on the life that you want to live. So, there's a great saying, which is show me your bank account and show me your calendar and I'll show you what you value. I want to turn that on its head. I want to get really clear on what it is that I value and then align my bank account and align my calendar to those things. And so I've got an exercise called the Unbreakable Year, where people envision their ideal life. And what happens for most entrepreneurs that I work with is they go through this exercise, and at the end you calculate, your ideal burn rate, your ideal spend. And most of them realize that they're either already at or within striking distance of their ideal spend, which means that more money isn't necessarily going to increase the quality of their life. And then we go through and go, okay, well, what is the gap between the life that you're living now and this ideal life that you just envisioned? And most of those changes are free. For most people, that looks like cutting down on their working hours and spending more time with their family, or taking that vacation that they've been putting off, or going to visit their parents more often. And those are the things that we can create at any time. We have the power to create at any given time. We just have to be really intentional, and we have to be really disciplined.
It sounds so easy to say, but it's so easy to do, right? So how do you? So I'm listening to that, and there's the little niggle in the back of my mind that's saying, Harry, get your shit together, keep working, man. We got to keep going. We got to keep going. That's there because of this, this insecurity that's pushed me to drive for success. How do you switch that off?
So, leading up to that level 3 financial freedom, where now you have complete control over your time, everything is a trade-off. And so you just have to look at, okay, if I hustle harder and I work, 60 hours a week, how does that affect my financial freedom timeline? And so, for some people, it may be worth putting your head down and grinding for a year or two if that means that you reach that ultimate financial freedom faster. But for most of us, we need to find that balance. And if you're stuck in a career or a company that you hate, right? Okay, well, that's actually detracting from your life. But if you can align your work with what you actually value, now we have an integrated work life. So like I said, I'm actually working harder. I was retired for a little while after I sold my company. I was spending all day doing fun things like mountain biking and snowboarding. I'm working really hard right now, but I love what I'm doing. So it feels integrated into my life. So it's okay for me to work really hard because that's filling my cup, not detracting from my cup. And so, I don't want to tell people, hey, you shouldn't be working. You should spend all your free time, doing things that bring you joy. Like those things are really important, but you just have to make sure that it's aligned with the life that you actually want to create.
The silver lining of the entire experience is that Mike now has more wisdom and a better relationship with his wealth and life satisfaction. Mistakes build us. If we never had the opportunities to learn from mistakes, we'd be stagnant, and there's lots of things about life we would never understand. And a second silver lining, sometimes there's more than one, is that Mike also learned he was passionate about sharing that wisdom so others don't have to learn the hard way like he did. He's also writing a book about it coming out later this year, so go and check him out.
This experience of losing all of this money and having a failed company that totally brought me to my knees, now I recognize is actually one of the greatest gifts of my life, because I carried a certain arrogance that only someone who's never lost could have. And so this total and abject failure actually brought a tremendous amount of humility, a tremendous amount of empathy, and realizing that, I probably had, even in my coaching practice, probably had this kind of, hey, pull yourself, get it together, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of lack of empathy. And now I really have a much deeper understanding that, sometimes you can make all the right decisions and it still doesn't go your way. And so the irony is now I am actually much more worthy of being a great coach, but it came from this failure instead of another win.
This episode in short, Mike thought he needed $100 million to feel secure. And even though he was getting closer and closer to that goal, he was nowhere near true financial security. Today, his focus is simple: cash flow, freedom, and building a life that brings him joy now, not more capital later. So if you're a founder or a CEO of a company and you want to avoid the same mistakes that Mike has made and the mistakes that lots of other founders have made going through their journeys, you need to be part of a community of people who understand, who've been there, who've done the same thing. And the best place to do that I know is Hampton. Joinhampton.com. It's a community of highly vetted people that share things like Mike have done here that just simply don't get talked about in public aside from this podcast. So you've got to go and check it out, joinhampton.com. And finally, if you're the founder of a company and you're thinking that you want a podcast exactly like Moneywise, well, there's good news for you. My company, Lower Street, produces this show, and we'd love to chat about producing yours. Give us a shout. Go to lowerstreet.co/Moneywise, and we'd love to talk to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.